The date was August 6, 2001. A quiet Saturday morning in Crawford, Texas. The President of the United States was on vacation. The sun was rising over a ranch. Birds were singing. The world felt calm. But inside a classified briefing folder, sitting on a wooden table, was a single document that would later haunt an entire nation. Its title read, Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. That morning, the President received his daily intelligence briefing, read the memo, and according to later accounts, turned to the CIA briefer and said, "All right, you've covered your ass now." Then the meeting ended. 36 days later, nearly 3,000 people were dead. But the story of 9/11 didn't begin on that Tuesday morning when the sky turned to fire over New York. It began years earlier, in the shadowed corridors of Langley, Virginia, in the quiet hum of computers, the rustle of classified cables, and the desperate voices of analysts who kept screaming into a system that refused to listen. This is the story of the warnings that came before the storm, the signals that were seen, the dots that were never connected, and the question that still burns at the heart of American history. Did the CIA know? And if they knew, why didn't they act? To understand what happened in the summer of 2001, you have to go back further, much further. The 1990s were a decade when America believed it had won. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. America stood alone as the world's undisputed superpower. And in that atmosphere of triumph, a quiet, bearded man sitting in a cave in Afghanistan had declared war on the most powerful nation on earth. His name was Osama bin Laden. In 1996, bin Laden issued his first formal declaration of jihad against America. In 1998, he issued a fatwa calling for the killing of Americans, civilians and military alike, wherever they could be found. The CIA was aware of both declarations. Senior analysts read them. They were logged, filed, and assessed. But assessments are not the same as action. Inside the CIA, a small obsessive team had been tracking bin Laden since the mid-19. They operated out of a dedicated unit known as Alec Station, named unofficially after the unit chief's son. This team was unlike anything else in American intelligence. They weren't just analysts. They were believers. They were consumed by al-Qaeda the way a detective is consumed by the one case that won't let them sleep. And by 1998, Alec Station was screaming. The evidence was piling up with terrifying clarity. In August of 1998, al-Qaeda simultaneously bombed the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Over 200 people were killed. More than 4,000 were wounded. This was not a random act of violence. This was a coordinated, sophisticated military-style operation carried out across two countries on the same day at nearly the same minute. The CIA knew al-Qaeda did it almost immediately. America fired cruise missiles at training camps in Afghanistan. President Clinton addressed the nation. The world watched. And then, as it so often does, the news cycle moved on. But Alec Station didn't move on. They kept watching. They kept listening. And in October of 2000, the next alarm went off. The USS Cole, a United States Navy destroyer, was docked in the port of Aden, Yemen. It was a routine refueling stop. Two men in a small inflatable boat pulled alongside the massive warship. They were smiling, they were waving, and then they detonated the explosives strapped to their bodies. The explosion tore a 40-foot hole in the side of the Cole. 17 American sailors were killed. 39 were wounded. Al-Qaeda had now attacked American embassies. Al-Qaeda had now attacked an American warship. The pattern was undeniable. The trajectory was clear. Something larger was coming. Inside the CIA, and specifically inside Alec Station, analysts had identified two men. Their names were Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Both had been present at a major al-Qaeda planning meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in January of 2000. American intelligence, through a liaison relationship with the Foreign Spy Service, had photographed that meeting. They had the faces. They had the names. They also knew, through visa records, that both men had subsequently entered the United States. Al-Qaeda operatives, known, photographed, named, inside America, and the FBI was never told. The reasons for this failure have been investigated, debated, and argued over for more than 2 decades. Some say it was bureaucratic incompetence, a simple administrative failure to share a cable that should have been shared automatically. Others say it was something more deliberate, that elements within CIA leadership wanted to surveil these men quietly, recruit them as sources, and didn't want FBI agents blundering into their operation. Whatever the reason, the result was catastrophic. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were 2 of the 5 hijackers who would board American Airlines Flight 77 on the morning of September 11, 2001, and fly it into the Pentagon. They lived in San Diego, California. They trained openly. They took flight lessons. One of them was even listed in the San Diego phone directory under his real name, al-Hazmi. Nawaf al-Hazmi, in the phone book, in America. While the CIA watched in silence and the FBI remained completely blind, meanwhile, the threat reporting was accelerating at a pace that began to genuinely frighten even the most hardened intelligence veterans. George Tenet, the director of Central Intelligence, would later testify before the 9/11 Commission that by the summer of 2001, the system was, in his exact words, blinking red. He described the threat environment as the highest he had ever seen in his career. Not elevated, not concerning. The highest ever. Throughout May, June, and July of 2001, the CIA's Counterterrorism Center produced report after report, memo after memo, warning after warning. The intercepts from signals intelligence suggested Al-Qaeda was in the final planning stages of a major operation. Human sources were reporting that something spectacular was imminent. The word spectacular appeared repeatedly in the intelligence cables. Something big, something designed for maximum impact, something that would shake the world. Richard Clarke, the National Security Council's chief of counterterrorism, a man who had spent years warning anyone who would listen about Al-Qaeda, was at breaking point. He sent urgent memos to the National Security Advisor. He requested emergency meetings. He told colleagues with absolute certainty that a catastrophic attack was coming and that the United States government was not on a war footing when it desperately needed to be. Clarke later described that summer as watching a slow-motion disaster unfold in real time, knowing the car was heading toward the cliff and being unable to reach the steering wheel. But the new administration had other priorities. There were briefings on missile defense. There were policy reviews on China. There were debates about the Middle East peace process. Terrorism, specifically Al-Qaeda and specifically bin Laden, was not the dominant, urgent focus at the highest levels of the White House in those critical months. And then came the Phoenix Memo. On July 10, 2001, an FBI special agent in Phoenix, Arizona named Kenneth Williams sent an urgent memo to FBI headquarters in Washington. In that memo, Williams noted something deeply alarming. An unusual number of Middle Eastern men were enrolled in American flight schools. They were paying in cash. They were asking specific questions about cockpit procedures and security vulnerabilities. Williams connected this pattern to Al-Qaeda and formally requested that FBI headquarters begin a nationwide review of flight school enrollments by foreign nationals. The memo landed at FBI headquarters. It was not acted upon. It was not forwarded to the CIA. It was not sent to the White House. It sat in a pile. In those same weeks, in the summer of 2001, the CIA learned that an Al-Qaeda associate named Zacarias Moussaoui had been arrested by the FBI in Minnesota after raising serious suspicions at a flight school. Moussaoui wanted to learn how to fly a Boeing 747. He was not particularly interested in learning how to take off or land. He was interested in what happens once a large commercial aircraft is already in the air. FBI agents in Minneapolis were alarmed enough to request a national security warrant to search Moussaoui's computer and belongings. They were convinced he was planning something catastrophic. That request was denied by FBI headquarters in Washington. The reason given: insufficient evidence to meet the legal threshold for a national security warrant. Moussaoui's laptop sat unsearched in a government evidence locker. On that laptop were connections to Al-Qaeda, names, contacts, details that, if followed, could have begun to unravel the operational thread of September 11th, while there was still time. It was never opened before the attack, and so we arrive again at that Saturday morning in Crawford, Texas, August 6, 2001. The memo, the briefer, the dismissal. 36 days. That is how much time remained between the President of the United States receiving a document titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. and the moment that American Airlines Flight 11 disappeared from radar screens and reappeared as a fireball against the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The story didn't end with the ash of September 11th. While recovery workers were still digging through the rubble, a different kind of work was happening behind closed doors. The machinery of accountability was already protecting itself. Within 72 hours, senior officials weren't just asking, "How did this happen?" They were asking, "How do we explain this?" The focus was on two men, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. These al-Qaeda operatives lived in America for 18 months. The CIA knew, the FBI didn't. In 2004, the CIA's own Inspector General finished an explosive report. It proved that dozens of officers had the data to stop them, and failed. It recommended formal punishment. But then, the system went silent. No one was fired. No one was demoted. The officers involved retired with full benefits and clean reputations. For decades, the families of the victims fought to see that report. They wanted names. They wanted the truth. But while the fires of 9/11 eventually went out, the secrets buried in Langley still burn. The 19 hijackers weren't ghosts. They lived among us. They used American banks, stayed in American hotels, and trained in American flight schools. They weren't invisible. They were hiding in the silence between agencies. In 2004, the 9/11 Commission report revealed the truth. The failure wasn't a lack of information. It was a system more loyal to its own folders than its own purpose. Information was hoarded, not shared. Nearly 3,000 people from 90 countries died that Tuesday. Fathers, mothers, pilots, and firefighters. Their last moments were defined by a tragedy that the world's most powerful intelligence community had already documented and failed to stop. The August 6 memo is now just a piece of history for students and researchers. But for 36 days in the summer of 2001, it was a last chance, a door that was never opened. The greatest failure wasn't that no one saw the storm coming, it's that so many people did, and the system looked the other way.